Who is your favorite fearless hero? Who is your favorite fearless hero?
No. I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained, the best podcast where we talk about all things entertainment. I'm your host, Bryson Olsen. Today we got a couple topics that we're going to be talking about. It's kind of the mashup of the end of 2022, really. We're going to be talking about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is the sequel to the original Puss in Boots, which is also a spin-off of the Shrek series. And then we are also going to talk about Avatar: The Way of Water, which is the sequel to the first Avatar movie directed by James Cameron. So yeah, let's talk about that. First, let's talk about Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I thought it was incredible. I had definitely gotten hyped up for it, but that is typically because I'm a big animation fan. I think it's very clever, all the types of things that we can do with animation. Because realistically, when it comes to animation, you can do virtually anything. You can't do that really with live action. And like some people argue about like CGI. Oh, we can do so much with CGI. Yes. However, with that, and you're using real people, you have to still kind of follow real life rules. Because everyone is so used to seeing things a certain way, it feels like you can't defy that, really. Like sometimes you can like break physics a little bit, but if you're doing it to a large extent, people notice, and then it's seen as sloppy because people are like, well, that couldn't ever really happen. Marvel does a little bit back and forth. Like some things people are like, that could never happen. Of course that couldn't happen. Of course Captain America, his shield wouldn't come back and doesn't do the things like it does in the movies. However, they do it in a real enough way that we are like, okay, that makes sense, because it like bounces off things and it comes back to him. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. And it's like Spider-Man swinging. Like there's math and stuff into how he swings. It's actually thought out, which is good. It's good that they do it that way. But when it comes to other type things and you're pulling it to a large extent, it becomes too unrealistic. It's no longer like just hitting the line. It's over the line, and people don't really believe anything like that. But that is where animation comes in. Animation, you're not using anything real. It's all made up. You're drawing or making 3D models of it. So it's not as restricted. I think that'd be a good word. Yeah, it's not as restricted in the medium as it is with live action, because in animation, you can create whatever you want. Like the limit is endless, quite literally, because you can do whatever you want. You're only limited by your own imagination, and you can just make whatever you want. And so for that purpose, I really love animation, because you can kind of just do whatever with it. And I like that lately the boundaries of animation have been getting pushed a little bit further, because I feel like Pixar did a very common thing for their style, and it's to do pretty realistic lighting. It's not like all their movies are realistic. In fact, most of them aren't realistically animated, which is good. I don't think they when you're doing animation, I don't think you should really be striving to make it realistic. However, they use realistic lighting principles. Light bounces off, and so you get ambient occlusion. So in like the dark areas, like for example, like anywhere there are creases in this hoodie that I'm wearing. Sorry if you're just listening and you're not watching. But for example, in a crease in a hoodie, that would get darker areas. But if you're wearing like a lighter colored hoodie, the light still bounces off, and so those shadow areas are not pitch black. They still get that light, which is ambient occlusion. And so that's kind of been like the Pixar style, and many studios do it, but I feel like Pixar has really perfected it. And they use a lot of realistic type principles, especially with like water and weather and different things like that. And then they mix that in with their stylized characters, which is not a bad thing. I personally love Pixar. I think almost all their stuff is amazing. I think they do great things. But I do think we see a lot of that style, and that makes sense. That's kind of how 3D animation got started, because Pixar was doing that from the beginning. And so everyone kind of followed that because, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You follow what is popular, and that was popular, and it still kind of is popular. However, we are getting more into an area that is paying a lot of homage to 2D animation, which was usually done a lot by hand. And even if it wasn't fully done by hand, there was a lot of personal creativity that went into the creation of the animation itself. So we get things like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is mixing a lot of 3D imagery while also adding 2D elements on top to add to like the comic book effect. And then you get things also like Arcane, which is kind of in a similar style. It's more lower, I wouldn't say quality, lower textures. I'm not sure if I'm describing this right. But the way Arcane is stylized, it's animated in 3D, but there are a lot of 2D elements. Backgrounds are 2D. They add 2D elements in like the form of effects and on faces and different expressions and things like that. And then you also have movies like Klaus, which is like the Netflix movie, which was actually animated in 2D, but the way they animated it allowed them to give almost physical form to 2D characters without actually making them 3D, and allowed light to interact with them in different ways, which pushed the boundaries of animation and what you can do with the medium. And I feel like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is another one of those really good examples. It is animated in 3D, which makes sense. It's kind of, I think it's almost easier for studios to animate in 3D because typically they can move a puppet around in 3D software rather than trying to draw frames individually. Because whether you're doing that digitally or not, it's still a very time-consuming process. Whereas if you're picking certain keyframes with 3D animation, usually a computer can simulate what it thinks will get through that animation, and then you can eventually program it in ways where it gets it pretty accurate most of the time. But with Puss in Boots, it also did something that's Into the Spider-Verse did as well. They added a lot of 2D elements on it, and they stylized it pretty heavily. Because when you think of Puss in Boots before, especially with Shrek, those movies were animated in what I said is called the Pixar style. They're obviously not Pixar movies, they were made by DreamWorks, but that style of animation is based on realistic principles. And so, like, even stylized animation is still based on that, but things are changed to give it a more stylized look. And I think in this movie they really did that because they went less for high detail, and gave more stylized characteristics. You don't see every hair on Puss's body. like you did in the previous ones. You could kind of pick out every single hair in like the Shrek movies or the original Puss in Boots. But you can't really do that here, which is good. I think the point of the story overrides what you need in detail, which is why I like the stylized ones a little bit more. I think they show off creativity and fun along with the story, and can kind of be used to help benefit because they add a lot of contrast. When you have a lot of realistic type animation, things tend to blend together pretty easily. Like if you look at, so I'm going to use like Shrek, and this is an example because it relates to Puss in Boots. A lot of the colors in there, although each character has their own color, so like Donkey's gray, Shrek is green, and he has his white shirt and like brown vest. Puss is orange, he's like a normal cat. However, because they're in a realistic setting, it's hard to pick them out in those settings. They blend more with the backgrounds. They're not as contrasted. With stylized animation, you can pick colors for characters because there's like whole things on color theory and like using colors to really grab your attention. That's what keeps you on that character. And so I feel like in this movie, the more stylized animation allows you to create that better with characters. Because Puss in Boots, he's clearly orange and he has his boots and his hat. You have the wolf, Death, who is like very clearly in dark clothes. You have the bears, which are all like a shade of brown, and then you have Goldilocks, who is a bit more, I can't describe her style really. She has a bit of color to her. But then you have Jack Horner, who has like a purple coat and everything, and he has this big silhouette to him, almost like Kingpin in Into the Spider-Verse. It kind of reflects similar type things. And I think stylized animation was definitely the way to go for that movie. And I like that that was the way they did it. And, you know, I love it. I think it shows a lot of care and effort being put in, because it's easy to just manipulate 3D puppets around and then slap on a render and then you're done. But the 2D added stuff that takes care. You can't just add that with like a quick little press of a button. You have to manually do that kind of stuff. And to be honest, I'm not sure how manually. I'm sure there are some parts that they can have a computer kind of figure out. But a lot of it is put in well with care. They want a specific look to it, which I like. I feel like when you have movies and media that has more care put into it, it makes it more intriguing for the audience watching. And so I think that's why I really liked the animation of this. But anyways, let's also talk about the story of Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, because I really liked this one. I didn't mind the original Puss in Boots. I didn't think it was a terrible movie, but it wasn't one that I like thought about very regularly. In this one, as you've seen through the trailers, Puss is down to his last life, and so he has to go on a journey because he wants to find a wishing star and get those 9 lives back. Well, 8, because he's lost 8. He only has 1. He wants to have his full 9 lives back. And so typically, as you would kind of expect, the journey is that he learns that 1 life is enough. But still, you're going throughout this thinking he's probably still going to try and wish for the rest of his lives. And they make it out to seem like that a lot because he's being chased by Death, who I am going to be talking about a little bit more. So he has this fear. He's like, if I die, it's over. I don't get to be the legend anymore. And so it kind of puts him into a bit of a rut because he's like, I want to do this. However, I'm too scared. And so that's where we get like, what's his name? Burrito? I think that's his name. Crap. I don't remember what the dog's name is. The little Chihuahua. He is great. Who's just like full of energy and he's so positive. He's like, well, just live your life, you know? Which speaking of him, you kind of go into it and you're like, oh, he's going to be so annoying. Like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they put this character in. He's going to drive everyone crazy. But then you realize, like, he has, what is his name? What is the dog's name? Is the dog's name in Puss in Boots? Burrito. Yeah, I was right. I'm a freaking genius. Okay. But so like so that character, the dog, Burrito, that's probably how you pronounce that, I think. I'm gonna have, if I have any Spanish speakers listening and they're like, bruh, you're an idiot. I'm like, yeah, I know. But so he wants to be like a therapy dog, and so he wants to help people. And he's like a typical dog. He just loves everybody and wants to be friends. And Puss is kind of like, nah, I'm not about that. But he kind of goes with them on this journey, saying that not everything has to be like super spectacular. It doesn't have to be a fight. Sometimes you can just appreciate what you already have around you, which is a big theme of this movie. Like Goldilocks, her dream, she wants a real family. She doesn't want to be with the bears anymore. She wants a real human family. But she learns that this found family that she has is still her family. They still care about her and they love her. And she realizes that she doesn't need a new one because she has one. Kitty Softpaws, she wanted someone she can trust and feels that will always have her back. And she goes throughout the movie kind of questioning that. She's like, I don't know, this, like, Puss is getting better, but then he does something selfish again. And then he finally redeems himself, and they're like, well, I got my wish as well. And Perrito never had a wish because he already had friends. He was like, what more could I really ask for? He's just making the best of everything he has. And then Puss wants his lives back. But then he realizes that he doesn't need those 9 lives to be a legend. He can be a legend with one, and that actually might make him a better one because he's always fighting for that one life. He's not expecting that he could die and he'll come back. He's like, I got 9 lives. Now he has changed his mindset, which makes Death a little annoyed, but also he respects Puss now. So speaking of Death, so he's sort of the main, I would say the main villain, and he's the main villain to Puss. I'd say Jack Horner is the main villain to the whole group. But to Puss himself, Puss as a character, his antagonist is Death, who is, in this universe, the big bad wolf. He's a bounty hunter who's come to collect Puss's soul. And the reason he's on his last life. And Death does not like cats. He thinks that 9 lives is insane. He's like, that is a stupid idea. Why should they get these 9 lives and cheat Death over and over again? And in the case of Puss in Boots, he didn't value his lives. He treated them like he could just do whatever he wants. He's like, I have no consequences to this. And so Death is annoyed by that. So he's hunting him for his last life because Puss didn't value his lives. He's like, well, if you didn't value them, you didn't realize the worth that they have, why do you need this last one? And so he is wanting to get Puss throughout this entire movie. And then at the end, they have this fight where Puss finally has his change of heart. And they do have like a good bout where Puss does have fear, but he will fight for his life. He's like, no, I value what I have now, and I will fight for it. And Death is like, dang it. Good. This is what I want. You value your life now. We will meet one day. However, that day is not today because you now have a respect for the life you have and for what you have been given, which is like this whole theme of the movie. It's respect for what you have in your life and being thankful for what you have and making the most of it, which I think is such a like good theme to base the whole movie around, and you can apply it to each one of these characters, except Jack Horner, because he sucks. Because he has, which I think is good, because he's a foil for all the other characters. I don't know if foil would be the right term, but essentially, maybe just saying the opposite, because Jack grew up with everything. He had money, he had a business, he had parents who took care of him. Not all these characters had that. And so he's like the complete opposite, and he's doing everything for selfish reasons. And other people are doing them for selfish reasons, but because they don't realize what they already have. And Jack doesn't realize what he has. Well, he kind of does, but he's arrogant of it. He's like, well, I want everything. But these other characters just want one thing. They want one thing that they believe will make their life better. And Jack wants everything, which I think makes him a really good antagonist to the whole group, because he's like the complete opposite of everybody. But Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, I think it was done magnificently. All the characters, fantastic. I think all the chemistry between all the characters as well is incredible. Because you get good story beats, especially I think Goldilocks and her family are a real good example, because they have their moments where they're like, oh yeah, we're a team, we got this. And then they also hate each other. There's a scene where they just insult each other because they're like, I can't stand you. I don't know why I'm with you. And so it really gives good chemistry with everything. And I love that much care was put into this movie. And I think not a lot of people were expecting it to be as good as it is. In fact, it's done phenomenally in critics and audience score on most platforms. Usually in like the high 90s, people are loving it, which I think is respectful, because personally, I think the movie is a 10 out of 10. I think it's wonderful. So I totally get it. And I think it's one that you should definitely see. And it's kind of took a lot of people by surprise, especially considering another movie that came out during December was not as well received. It has made a lot more money, but it has not been as well received. And that movie would be the next one we're talking about, which is Avatar: The Way of Water. It was directed by James Cameron, who directed the last Avatar. He also has directed movies like Titanic. So he now has 3 movies in the top 10 highest grossing films of all time, which is insane, because Avatar: The Way of Water has just hit like 2 billion as of today, as of recording this, I think. Maybe a little before, maybe had reached that on Sunday, but it has hit 2 billion in global revenue, which is insane. That is incredible, especially considering the audience score is kind of iffy. Because what I have gotten, and I finally saw it this last week, is the movie is sort of mid, is what a lot of people think. I personally thought it wasn't that bad. I think it's getting a lot of hate for seemingly no reason. I can understand why there's this hate that's going on. However, I don't think it's necessary. Yeah, the movie could have a lot of things improved on it. However, it's not as bad as people say. But a lot of people, I think, were a bit annoyed at seemingly the arrogance of James Cameron. Because he kept going on. He's like, oh, this is this magnificent film. You'll want to see it several times. Hilariously, I am seeing it several times. The second time, it's for cheaper, and I'm seeing it with friends. But I think it was that kind of almost lack of humility from him that people kind of wanted the film to fail. especially because there's more movies coming out. And people are like, it's been so long since the last one. What has even happened? And I think that's why people were so negative about it. And I understand why. Because, there's a bit of arrogance behind it. He's like, well, it's a great movie. I showed it to the pitch team and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. We got notes, but it's all right. And so people were kind of like, oh my gosh, I hope this flops so bad. And they were kind of hating on it. And I feel like some of it is deserved and some of it is also not. Because I think the movie did improve on the first one, I would say. The first one is pretty average of a story, I would say. And I feel like this one improves on that a little bit more. They're very similar stories almost entirely. But in this one, it's a lot about family, in that they want to protect their family. And because as in this world, the Na'vi are very... they're very connected, like quite literally, because they can connect like their nerves and stuff to things. And so they want to protect the people. And so in this movie, the Sullys, which is Jake, Neytiri, and their kids, they're all on the run. And so they go to the Metcaina clan, which is like an ocean clan. And they have to learn the way of water, where they like have to do like, they have to ride like wave riders, like skimmers. I can't remember if that's what they're called or not. But it's like creatures that are like that, and they are like flying fish, or they're like whale equivalents and dolphin equivalents and that kind of stuff. So they kind of have to learn all about that. So it's a whole nother culture that they're trying to learn. And like, that's a pretty simple story, which may be why some people are ragging on it so much. I feel like personally that's overdoing it a little bit, because sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it is long. I do not think the movie had to be as long as it is. I think they definitely could have cut it short a little bit. And although I also agree a little bit with the hate on arrogance from Jim Cameron, I also get why he does it. He's very passionate about this series. It is his love child, essentially. He loves this series, and that's why they have 4 movies planned. I think they were going for 5, if I'm not mistaken, but I know they have like almost all of 3 filmed, and they've worked a lot on 4 as well, because of they don't want like child actors fully aging out and stuff like that. But I understand it from a creative standpoint. You've put so much passion into this project. You would want to show it off. Like, I understand that. And I feel like it gets hate because people were like, well, it's not going to be successful. Or, and if it is, it's kind of a fluke, like the first one was. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. We can respect people for wanting to put out their passion projects. Yes, Jim needs a little bit of humility for sure. But how come we treat this project, which has had a lot of care and thought put into it by Jim Cameron? He loves the series. He wants to build this whole world, and he's very good at it. I feel like he really expands on this world and the people and the language and the culture. And he takes inspiration from the real world, but also changes things up. So he's not pretty much copying everything, but like paying respect to other types of cultures. And how can we treat this project differently than a project like Into the Spider-Verse or Puss in Boots? Because like Puss in Boots, for example, it feels like that had a lot of love put into it by its creators. There's a well-created soundtrack. They put a lot of effort into the animation and clearly the story, because like everyone is loving it and people gravitate towards it, and it shows all these different themes. It makes me wonder why we put those two in different categories, because the creators of both obviously were very passionate about what they do. And so I think it's a little weird that we separate them. And I do think that Puss in Boots was technically better than Avatar: The Way of Water, but I can't exactly explain why. Because I did like both. I did not think Avatar: The Way of Water was the best thing I've ever seen. I didn't think Puss in Boots was the best thing I've ever seen. However, I think there was less wrong with Puss in Boots overall. I think pacing in Avatar could have been a little bit better. They could have shortened the time a little bit. However, those are things that don't exactly deter me from watching a film. I do think they can help in wanting to rewatch a film, especially like the length of it. Because if a movie is like super long, like for example, I will probably never watch the Zack Snyder Justice League cut ever again, because it is so unbelievably long. And another example is Avengers Endgame. That one is extremely long. I love it. I thought the movie was fantastic. We're going to use that example instead of Snyder Cut, because I don't care for Zack Snyder, but that's okay. I'm allowed to have that opinion. If you like him, that's great too. But so for like Avengers, that movie is really long, and it takes a lot for me to want to sit down and watch that whole thing because it's so long. I usually, if I think about it, I want to watch clips and I don't want to watch the whole thing all at once. And I feel like for longevity, movies shouldn't be super long all the time. I get why James Cameron did it, because he wanted to show off this world and bring so much into it. And I do love that for him, because I think that's a great way for him to do his world building. However, I think in storytelling aspects, that doesn't work as great. However, I still respect the passion that went into it, and I still fully enjoy the movie, and I'm going to be seeing it a second time with friends, and I will definitely enjoy myself because it's not a terrible movie. And I would also love to see Puss in Boots again. Will I? Who knows? I would like to, though, because I thought that one was better. But I don't know if all my friends want to see it. But I did like them both, and I think they are a closer matchup than people are really making it out to seem. And I get that. I understand that to a very high level. People are like, well, Puss in Boots is getting this tremendous audience score, and Avatar: The Way of Water is not. And I get both of that, but also I'm on the side where I think both are pretty good movies. And so I feel like it is a closer matchup than we really think. And if I'm watching either of them, I'm pretty easily entertained. So it is what it is. And, I think it's something that you do kind of have to make judgments for yourself. I think they're good movies. They're watchable. I don't think they're unwatchable. I don't think if you were to watch one, you'd be like, oh, I hate that. I wanted to watch. You definitely wouldn't feel that way about Puss in Boots. You may feel like you wasted a lot of time with Avatar, but I don't feel like you would come out of the experience regretting it. I don't think you would hate that you watched the movie. And I think that's a really good thing. Because if you went into it and you're like, man, I hated this. Why did I ever watch this? Then I would understand that. That is me with Citizen Kane, and that will be for a whole nother episode one of these days. But yeah, I think Puss in Boots and Avatar: The Way of Water, it was a close matchup for the end of 2022, in my opinion. I think it was a lot closer than people make it out to believe. But I think at the end of the day, they were very entertaining, and y'all should watch either of them because they're still in theaters, so you should go check them out. Personally, I would say you should watch Puss in Boots in theaters. I feel like you're getting more bang for your buck in that one, but I still feel like you're getting a good deal with Avatar: The Way of Water as well. So, yeah, Puss in Boots, Avatar, closer matchup than you think. And that's my thoughts on that. So I hope you guys did enjoy this episode of Easily Entertained, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to Easily Entertained with me, your host, Bryson Olson. If you enjoyed, please tune back in on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And be sure to check out our social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter to get all the latest on entertainment. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.